Welcome to Belkin's Growth Podcast, hosted by Michael Maximoff, co-founder and managing partner at Belkin's. Today's guest is Jeff Bruno. Jeff is CEO of Your Outsourced CFO. The firm helps small to medium-sized companies understand how their why or goals can trickle down to a cohesive financial strategy to implement and manage growth milestones. Michael and Jeff speak about financial planning best practices, business KPIs, and common mistakes entrepreneurs make when scaling their business. Enjoy listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.
I wanted to start off with, because we're going to be talking a lot about financial planning, KPIs, budgeting, and about the role of chief financial officer in the organizations. I wanted to get the terminology straight. So in your own words, right, who are chief financial officers and what is their role in organizations? Just again, because I don't have one, okay? And I've never had calls with CFOs before. And you being a CFO with 15 plus years now?
Yeah, almost 20 years now. Yeah,
almost 20 years.
About 20 years, yeah.
All right, so who are these CFOs, Jeff?
So sure. Michael, that's it. Your question is a really good one because it's actually something we're promoting big time in the next few months. So the CFO, the moniker CFO, Chief Financial Officer, has really changed in the last 25 years. So that's important for your audience to understand. So there are many articles out there about this, but there's like CFO 1.0, CFO 2.0, and CFO 3.0, right? We're in CFO 3.0 right now. So let me explain what that means if that's where you're going with this. So 40 years ago, 50 years ago, CFO 1 was really that bean counter, all about reporting, all about how do I execute off of financials, and that's it. That was what people understood CFO to be. Then the second iteration of that was, well, there's data we can play with now. So let's make more informed decisions about where the business is going with our data to help us, and then we'll execute on that. That's CFO 2.0. Now there's CFO 3.0. And what we're calling that is the modern day CFO. So the difference between 1, 2, and 3 is really 3 takes into account the strategies of the business and the operation and ties that together into a plan using financials as a tool and looking only forward. Never really, not too concerned about historical, only for trending. But they're looking forward, but they're really pulling in the whole business strategy. And for the smaller companies, they're pulling in what the business owner is thinking about and where they want to go as a goal with the business. They're much more engaged in the operation than they have been historically. And so they're making calls for the operational process and the growth much more than they used to.
Got it. Okay. So I think in a way, a lot of entrepreneurs, their own CFOs 3.0, right? Because a lot of entrepreneurs, as far as I know, right, and me including, we are tackling some of those challenges and thinking about those problems. However, we probably don't have the right education or the right experience tackling all those problems. That's why we're making so many mistakes, right? And then obviously, if I'm making a mistake that is like, okay, everyone is making mistakes and it didn't play the huge role for the business and I'm still, growing, but if I made a mistake that is really, really important for the business, for example, choosing the right business model, right? And I think that would be, perfect for this call with you to talk specifics, and we can use my company because I'm very open about, the numbers, the metrics that we are using, so on and so forth, because in the managed service business, it's not about the uniqueness of your IP. It's about the execution, right? So if my competitors can hear this and if their execution is not that effective as mine, then, we cannot be competing using the same methodology, right? Or the same tech or something. And at what point in time does, do organization need to have CFO on board? Or this is something that you need to be thinking about from the very early start?
Well, let me clarify a little bit there because there's CFO strategies, and then there's having a full-time CFO on board in your organization, right? So, that's what we do. We're your outsourced CFO. So, we are the CFO strategy without the cost of having a full-time CFO. on your team. So that's important for a business of when you need what you need. Most small businesses, 1 million, 2 million, 4 million, 8 million, 15 million. A lot of small businesses don't, even in those ranges, as high as 15 to 20 million, a lot of times, don't need a full-time CFO because they need controls. They need to understand their financials. But to pay, 175, 200, 225 for a CFO, for those size businesses, that's really what the cost is. Sometimes doesn't make sense early on. Unless you're a high growth startup, and you're funded, that's a different scenario. But if you're growing 10, 20, 30% a year, something like that, 50% a year, organically, you don't necessarily need a full-time CFO. However, CFO strategy and forecasting and so on is critical for a small business to do early on. I mean, we have clients that are at 500,000. That's rare for us. But most businesses around, there's actually a point, Michael, a very, very clear point. Most businesses around 2.5 to 3.5 million in revenue is when they start to get sort of so complex. It's a whole nother level of financial management. And they can start to have more funding options open up for them to continue to scale their business. And they also get very employee heavy at that point. So there's a lot employee heavy or product heavy. So there's a lot of cash flow issues that develop around that time frame of a business. So around there is usually when you need to start looking at some sort of support.
Kind of to step back a bit here, what kind of CFO strategies are you talking here? If I'm just, I wanted to understand. So I started the business back in early 2017. It was just me and my co-founder. We landed a few clients. We start delivering the value to those clients, start growing the cash flow, right? Start generating some revenue for the company. At that point, are there any CFO strategies that I need to think about or I had to thought about and at that very, very early stage? Or it's more about how to generate more business, how to sort of like just choose the business model? Because again, I think that, in a way, if you're creating a new niche or if you've never worked in the similar company before, right? You're starting the business, it's, you're out of blue. You just know that, okay, I'm doing this much money I will be charging, or this is the product that I'm selling. But you don't know whether the business model that you choose, is it like a SaaS business model, or is it like time and material or fixed plus or something, right? So is it the time where I need to think about CFO strategies, or it doesn't matter at that point? I need to do that in 2018, basically.
So, Michael, that's a really good question. So, entrepreneurs, if you've ever read books, about lean management, the lean philosophy on building a business as an entrepreneur. So, you really got to build, measure, and learn. That's for a service-based business or for a business that might be a product type business or a tech business, anything. It can be anything like that. You need to really do those three things. So, in that process, when you're small, there are times when CFO strategies per se could not be that effective, meaning there's not that many moving pieces until you figure out what your niche is and you figure out that the value you're providing to the marketplace, it resonates, right? And then you can test price points. So, you could have some consulting help, like, some CFO thought process, but ongoing that early, not always, because you got to test the market. You got to see, well, if I get to a certain point of selling my product at this price, can I support some of the early staffing that I have? But then when you start to think about scale, like, can I take this and now can I go from 500,000 revenue to 5 million? That's a whole nother question. That's when you start to have to think about CFO support. I'll give you an example. So let's say you, Michael, you started in the lead sourcing business and you figured, all right, guys, I don't know what your GP is, your gross profit, but let's figure you said, all right, I could do well with a 60% gross profit. I could succeed there. So I'm going to price where I can get a 60% gross profit. And you're sort of taking yourself out of that picture or your partner out of that picture and say, no, we're part of the business. We're not really factored into that GP. And you're consistently hitting 60 or 70% GP. But then as you start to get bigger, you see that your GP starts to erode because you need more supportive people. Like, for example, Michael, you might be really good at doing the technical development and the sourcing, the lead sourcing and so on. But the people you hire might not be as fast as you, right?
Right.
So it takes more time for them to get to that next level. And that's something you didn't think about. So now your 60 to 70% GP is really 50% GP when you get these other support people under you. So that's the build and test kind of period to see what it looks like. But a CFO would then come in and say, look, Michael, this is what it looks like. We cannot get to 70 GP. It's not realistic. And at scale, we might even be at 45 GP. So let's take that into account when we're going to scale, because that's the money you're going to use to operating capital you're going to use to continue to grow your business. That's a specific example.
The metric that I was personally using to determine this was like cost of service, right? So we know so I have client A, and I've been supporting the client, and we've been spending, for example, 50% or 60% of what client was paying us on supporting the client, right?
There you go.
Because I was paying myself and the people involved in the project, right? However, if I delegate that and hire a sales rep or a lead rep that's going to be doing that, and they cannot work with like 3 clients because they don't have experience, they work with 2 clients. So I need another rep that work with 3rd client, right? So
that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the cost of service will go higher, right?
Yes.
So depending on the strategy, right? Some as far as I know, some organizations are looking into growth, and they cannot support like kind of top salary positions, like that you cannot just hire the person off the HubSpot that worked for like 15 years and paying like $200,000 for the person. You probably are looking for junior because you're just starting out the company, hiring junior, not very experienced to teach people sort of like, and to help them to build a career, right? And because of that, they cannot be effective as you are. And and that creates the problem because so many entrepreneurs, they don't delegate to very late stage, and when they start delegating, their numbers not make any sense, right? And say, hey, I was making this much money, but I was doing the job, and now we're not making this much money because I'm not doing the job. Why? They probably can come to you with this question, correct?
All the time. That's exactly my point. You couldn't have said it better than it's. You could do cost plus. What is your cost over, or what is your profit, your GP, your gross profit? Same scenario. That's great. And that's a common issue that people come up, because think about it this way too. There's also training costs, right? That you don't even realize. So, it could take 3 months for a person even to get up to a level that's not as good as you are. So there's training costs involved there, which people forget about as well. They don't calculate that into the growth. And you know what that translates into? Cash flow. That's what happens, because you can't put them on the projects fast enough. So they're really a drain on your cash early on.
How many companies you work with or have cash flow problems due to very early stages of their work? All of them? Really? A lot of them. Yeah, that's the main problem, basically, like the cash problem.
Yes.
So they come in and say, hey, Jeff, help us to solve the cash problem because we're spending way too much, right?
So cash is one of the biggest issues that clients have. Funding is as well, meaning I can't get money from banks. I've used all this alternative lending, or do I have to put more of my own capital in? Does it make sense? Those are some of the big questions, along with which also come from cash flow. But those are 2 of the biggest things that companies deal with early on. And with cash, it's tricky because there will be a lot of companies that say, well, I don't understand. If they're a product company, my net income's still strong, but my cash is not consistently. And it's because they're reinvesting consistently to keep pushing the revenue higher, so their cash keeps falling behind.
Got it. Okay. So that was my while you were telling me this, I was thinking why people have that cash constraints or cash problems if they're growing the business. I mean, at the end of the day, specifically when we were talking about the service business, obviously we're talking about like something like, manufacturing or something that requires a lot of upfront investment. And then you're in debt from the start. And that's the way, the business works, right? You cannot just do that without almost everyone, right? When I'm thinking about, starting out a marketing agency or consultancy agency, right? From my own point of view, a business owner needs to package their services and products in a way that they should be financially healthy from the first month or the first sort of like engagement pilot that they're doing with that project, because they need not just include the cost of service, but also acquisition cost and extra costs that are in there. And what I notice is that many people don't realize what the acquisition cost is, right? And why it's important to include in there, because they're like, hey, I'm making, let's say, 10 grand per client and I'm spending 5 grand. And I was like, I should be cash positive basically because they are paying the bills, everything great. But I didn't include that I cannot acquire the customer, or for me to acquire the customers, it gets too expensive, right? Because I'm spending too much into marketing, into sales. I hire these top performing salespeople and so on and so forth. For me not to have this problem, right? If what are your recommendations basically?
Sure. So really it comes down to, this is an important word. It's called the cash conversion cycle for businesses. Okay. So really what that is, for service businesses, it's simple. Okay. It's your AR, your AP, and when you collect and when you pay bills. I mean, that's pretty much it. So a recommendation to companies that we'll say is take as much money up front. If you have a product where you're doing, like for your product, try to get 50% deposit up front, or try to get retainers so that you're essentially head of the cost, at least the variable cost of the team executing on the process. So you get into day one of the new contract and your CAC, or your cost to acquire that client, is already taken care of by the deposit, right? And then you're working at the same time that you're getting the next tranche of money. And that's where the cash conversion comes in, your AR function. If you have people paying you in arrears for work, you want to make sure you limit that to 30 days. So that in 1 month, if your workload is a month to get something done, you're getting paid at the end of that month. And then you have many fewer cash problems. That's really what we recommend to clients is shorten that cycle. So you have the capital to grow. You'd be surprised. We get into clients and we go in there and we look at their financials and they're 50 days collecting on AR. And they're paying their AP at 30. They're like, I need to take care of my vendors. They're very aggressive. But great, take care of your vendors. But you have to pull those AR days down or you're never going to have enough cash to support the growth of your business. So that's a big factor.
This is so true. And that goes down to the business model, right? Because typically, I mean, you can go either with, as you mentioned, like for you to get like 50% deposit basically, or have those retainer-based model. This is what you decide when you start the business, right?
Correct.
This is when you just, start packaging your service and say, okay, this is what I do. This is how much money I pay. How do I kind of package that in a way that my clients can pay the retainer, right? And yes. I think that I've had multiple conversations with, agency owners within the past few years, and a lot of them specifically that are in consulting business, every one of them have their like project-based work, right? You have a contract, you fulfill the contract, you get compensated, right? That's it. But many of them say that it is very chaotic, that it's not very stable with regards to how they can generate the cash flow, because they cannot predict how much money would they invest and make within a certain period of time. That's why the SaaS model, and which is like retainer-based model, basically, when you get paid every month, where it's great because you always can sort of calculate what your cost for that customer is and how much money you're making. And then you can always, having that net 30, you always can sort of like pay the bills, pay the salaries, get paid by the customer, and see that cash flow going. And if something is off, and if you see that you're not even making, or you're not where you want to be within a month, then something is off. You need either to increase the cost or decrease the cost or something, because you're spending way much, right? That's why a lot of companies have a small retainer or like a small value that you can deliver. Like, for example, let's take an example, HubSpot, because I've just recently signed up for them. The CRM HubSpot.
Sure, they're a great SaaS company.
Yeah. They have a retainer, right? And, I think that 5-10 years ago, they had a monthly subscription. So you can always sign up for a month and you can use them for a month. Then they start offering only a 1-year subscription. So you cannot, and you pay them upfront for a year. So you cannot just pay them like I'm paying, or I'm using and then paying. So you pay them upfront, because probably there was some cash problems because they were, spending too much for scaling their business because they're in very competitive space. But then they start adding the setup costs. And the setup cost goes to the acquisition, because typically you cover your acquisition with the setup cost, because the way it works, you pay the setup cost and then you pay the bills, but then the setup cost costs the acquisition plus like the sales commission, marketing cost, and some of the tech vendor costs that they do, right? And that's the sum that they can sort of like have that extra cash coming all the time. And I think that was the logic behind making the decision of that setup cost and 1 year retainer, right? So
sure. Yeah. I mean,
reason.
People will tack on setup costs, $795, and then they'll have a $1,500 retainer or something like that. I know many service firms that do that, and it's precisely for that reason. It's to cover the salesperson handoff and the time they spend on it, and those other costs that are out. There's no question. The key piece is if you have a business that has a product and a service, like a SaaS company could offer some products and some services, you want to make sure that you have enough of that recurring retainer to cover what we call like your fixed costs. That's an objective we push towards businesses a lot. Let's say you have $50,000 in fixed costs a month. It could be employees that are working on direct products. It could be you, your salary, other people, your overhead, your like office overhead. We call that fixed costs, right? So you want to have enough retainer to cover that. Now you have very minimal cash flow problems because it's all variable. And if you're in 30 days within payments and payments going out the door, your cash you should have minimal issues. So that's kind of how we push companies to say, can we figure out a way to get your business to at least cover your fixed costs as you continue to grow with a retainer? And then you plug in projects as you need to keep going. So that's a strategy to help avoid that.
This is great. And I was lucky to have this strategy from the very beginning because, again, I knew, because that was the industry standard. That was the industry that I was in. Everyone was doing that because I think that we learned that from SaaS. That was, the start. Because, again, right now, it's not a surprise for you that if you want to sign up for HubSpot, you need to pay upfront, right? You never use the product and then you pay after that. You always do that upfront. So I think that people start more comfortable by paying upfront for the service or the product, right? Just because of that, and people start understanding that. Again, I'm not talking about like huge checks or big projects, right? Like it's more like transactional story basically. And this is something that, again, wanted to talk with you about because there are so many books that are written about how to build a tech company. Like you can read a lot of books about tech companies, right? But there are so few that have about how to build a successful managed service company. Really, I mean,
not as sexy.
yeah, exactly. So, there are a lot of like small consulting shops, but most of those small consulting shops, they're like 2-3 people, right? Everyone like founder of the company who is doing the consulting work. So it's more like, like independent freelancer work basically, but it's not like like a business, right? In a way. So when I think about what decision I made when we started this, I said to myself, then if I want to move fast and if I want to not to spend a lot on my acquisition, I need to package my services in a monthly retainer subscription where it is not too expensive for the customer and I still can cover the cost and I can bill them on a month-to-month basis and I can, work on my retention. So my 2 metrics were, what is my new sales that comes every month? Right? But what is my retention, right? Like what is my customer lifetime value, how much month customers works with me and so on and so forth. And based on that, I could build some kind of predictability. I can know how much money would I generate or how much cash would I generate next month or the month after, just based off the metrics that I was thinking about.
A lot of our clients, Michael, when they start getting into growth, they get too complicated. So they do the Oracle or they don't necessarily bring in the ERP systems, but they think they have to metric the heck out of everything in their business. And really, that's not smart because what it comes down to in a business is maybe 3, 4, 5 main metrics that you're looking at. That's it. If you over metric, you get confused and you place emphasis in the wrong spot, right? So to give you an example, your lifetime value for a client, if your lifetime value for a client was 200,000, let's say it was 3 years of engagement with the client, right? You could easily project what your business will look like in 3 years from now, based off of what your goals are this year in client acquisition. So you could easily go, okay, if I'm going to acquire 50 clients, and then that means X dollars, what's my cost to acquire those clients? And in 3 years, I'll have that many more clients on board because my lifetime values, they last for 3 years. So it's an easy methodology to forecast. Now, there are bumps in the road. There are always bumps in the road. This is important. This is the key piece. This is what business, I want to bring this up, Michael, if it's a good time. This is what businesses forget early on, and why having a CFO on board early is helpful. Early, I mean around 2, 3, 4 million, but why it's helpful. What doesn't happen to small businesses? Banks won't lend to small businesses. They don't lend to them. It's very difficult to get lending. Why is that? Let me explain why.
Risk. It's
high risk. Oh, for sure it's high risk. But there's another reason to it. Over the past 2 decades, small business loans have fallen more out of favor. But why have they? They've fallen to about half. They used to, business loans, maybe about half of the businesses would get them. Now it's about a third. A third. And the reason that is because the transaction costs are so high to do a smaller loan for a bank that there's a cost-heavy scenario. And regulators, they've been making banks, since 2008, all heavy too. They've been making banks hold more capital against their loans. So why would the bank do a $300,000 loan when they can do a $1 million loan? They don't want to. Right. So it's just, it doesn't make sense. So it's harder and harder for companies to get that in lending. So my point there is, as you're growing and you're looking at your CAC and this, and then you say to yourself, I want to put $50,000 into my cost to acquire clients, and you hit a bump in the road and you have a 4-month period where you miss targets consistently. And now what happens? You've hired for that. So you're behind, but you don't have financing. So what do? So you run out of cash. So you're scrambling around. The owner says, put more money in. You, Michael, you put $50,000 of your own money in. You're scrambling. And it's like so stressful. Everybody freaks out. But if you had a credit line, problem solved. So what we do early on with clients is we say, banks won't give you money when you need it. So let's get $50,000 in right now. Let's get $100,000 when you can get it, and build that credit over the next 2 to 3 years, so that you don't have these problems that as your growth grows. See what I mean?
This is smart. Yeah. And I'm sure that many folks, they reinvest their future profits or their future earnings into acquisition specifically, right? Because
they do.
Because that's like how the SaaS business operates, right? If you're making, let's say, like $500 per client per month, and you know that client can work with you 12 months, obviously, you cannot say that, hey, my acquisition would just be like less than 500 because I cannot spend more. Typically, SaaS say, hey, I can spend 1,500 or 2,000 because in 4 months I'll break even, and in 4 months I will start making some money. So I reinvest those extra 1,500, and I can say, so my acquisition is for 2,000, and I'm still healthy, right? Because my acquisition and my cost minus my LTV is still, I'm kind of like, I have a great growth profit, right?
Yes.
But then Corona happens, right? And then clients start closing contracts, churning, and then you just have your cash flow going down a lot, right?
Sure,
and that's the problem. I'm one of those people that proponent of bootstrapping. So I'm like bootstrapping. So I'm not either, we don't have any credit line on the company or any investor money. So we're trying to bootstrap it, but that's very difficult because you always kind of, you have your head above the water like this, and very often you feel like, okay, now I'm going to drown, like for sure.
Yeah, totally.
But you always, that brings extra motivation, right? Because you know that you always need to pay the bills, and that gives you that extra like percentage of revenue that you can reinvest into growth. So you can always grow, right? So you don't kind of, during our first year, we were so reinvesting everything that we were earning. Then one time when we had churn at like 35% or something, 40%, yeah, that was like 2 very difficult months. And it was like summer. so that was super difficult, super stressful. And then I think in the next year, me and my co-founder, we give each other word that we would be accumulating cash as an extra just in case something like that happens, right? And that's why, you make a decision about adding a setup fee, because you know that you need to drive your costs down, right? Or about increasing your costs, right? Like cost of service.
Sure.
Because even if you increase that by 5-10%, sometimes it's extra $50, for example, but that would, bring a lot of value for you at scale, right? When you have like 100 customers or 200, right?
It does. And here's another problem that businesses forget early on, right? I don't think you had a big issue with this, Michael, because of your situated with growth, but tax considerations. And we're not CPAs, but we help companies reinvest for managing tax. And I want to bring this up now because one of the things companies will do is they'll say, like you just said, I want to save cash, right?
Yeah.
That's a good idea to save cash. I'm all about it. But if you're saving cash, now you're paying tax on that cash.
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's okay. There's nothing wrong with paying tax. It means you're growing your business and you're doing well. And actually, by paying tax, it helps you. The irony of this whole thing is it helps you get more credit lines.
Yeah.
More banking relationships.
Yeah.
But it's much better to have a credit line.
Yeah, because you're not paying that extra tax, and it's like
and
that's
you're not paying the tax.
Yeah, depending on the state or something. But if you accumulated, let's say $200,000 or $500,000, and you pay 20% of that, like a corporate tax or something, right? This is a lot, and you're like, hey, I could reinvest that $100,000 into I don't know, hiring extra few people and growing more business, right?
Sure.
So that's smart. That's why you have a credit line, because you're not paying anything for the credit line, but you still have that cash available for you in case. Right?
That's right. The key is to manage it, though, because banks hate when what they call it dead money. When companies will use a credit line as like working capital, they won't repay it and use it to grow. Like take the profits, pay the line down, then use it when you're at the next stage. They'll just pull it, use it, and then you can't pay it back down. So you got to be careful how you manage that too. It's really
what is the best practice for managing that?
So really, if businesses have cyclicality, or if you know where you have new contracts come in, that you have a wave of profit with those for a certain period of time, it's smart in your planning to say, well, when we become cash rich again, just plow it back into the line. What companies will do is they kind of, because they don't have a financial person on their team or watching it consistently, they will forget about it and kind of say, oh, I have extra cash. Not, the line's already all used. I have extra cash. You know what? I'm going to take that extra money out, or I'm going to hire that new person when they really shouldn't yet. So it kind of disrupts the thinking. You should really sort of take steps, do it, repay the line, and use that. And then go back to the bank and say, I need a higher line now because now I do this with larger tranches of money. So that's how you grow.
And that's when you do planning, right? And this is a very important thing that I wanted to talk with you about, because we start doing planning just very recently. So what kind of planning, from CFO standpoint, should be business doing right now? Is there any specific types of planning, like financial planning? I mean, again, sometimes it's, we need to be like very lean the way you operate the business, right? Because if you put like a plan or budgeting for a year, you probably will not hit that, right? Because it's so dynamic right now. You need to be more flexible. So what kind of planning should I be doing right now with regards to either my financial being or my business operation, that maybe there are some patterns or some recommendation that you can give me right now?
Sure. So let me refine that word a little bit if I can. So financial planning in our vision is really one aspect of your planning, okay? Because when you look at your whole financial strategy, you have to consider your resource planning as much as which is really for your business resource planning, which is just as critical as your financial planning. Because, it's a component of financial planning, but it's just as critical, meaning if you don't manage your utility, your staff correctly, and how those metrics come into your overall financial plan, you're going to be in trouble. So when you say, I want to grow X, you need to say, well, what revenue per employee do I need? What profit per employee do I think I'm going to get? And then if I'm a company that expects 85% utility, is that realistic? Can my employees really hit an 85% utility? If you think about it, if employees have 3 weeks off between holidays, vacation, sick, and so on, you're almost right at 85% utility already, very close to it. So that means they're working every hour constantly on projects. That's a hard measure to hit.
Yeah.
So those are key things you have to think about in your financial planning. And when you do that, you put that all into a budget. When I say budget, it's really a forecast.
Right.
That's another important thing. Budgets mean nothing. They don't. I mean, for a growing business, a budget, it means something for maybe 3 months, but it doesn't mean something for a long period of time. So what we recommend in your financial planning is a rolling forecast. So it depends on what kind of business you are, how fast you have to roll it. Some businesses will do it quarterly and they'll push out a whole quarter. Some will do it monthly. Some will do it 6 months. I mean, most of our clients probably do about quarterly. So go a quarter, then they'll look at a whole new year. Go a quarter, look at a whole new year. Consistently rolling that forecast, because you have to consider things a year out almost always with business planning. So that's some of the things we say to people.
What should I include in my forecast? What do we need to forecast? Is it just like I don't know, company GP or
GP? I mean, gross profit is important, but that's another miss, Michael. Is it's really contribution margin, not gross profit.
Contribution margin.
Yeah, let me explain that a little for the audience. So when people think of contribution margin, it's really this. It's taking all your variable costs. It's not, hey, do I want to spend money on that or not? That's not a variable cost. It's, does that cost align with the revenue? Straight up. If I increase in revenue, that cost increases. So that's the variable cost. So you got to monitor your contribution margin, because every dollar that you have of that goes to your fixed cost. And your fixed cost is cost to acquire a client, your salary, again, your rent. So all of those dollars are important to see what percentage of those dollars go towards those fixed costs. So as you grow, I'll give you an example. Let's say it's 50%. Okay? And you say, I'm going to hire a new salesperson. That person is $100,000 in cost. Now I know, Michael, that you need $200,000 in new sales over the next year to cover that salesperson's salary. If you have a 50% contribution margin, it's that easy. So it's a major metric we look at is contribution margin in determining your growth.
So I need $200,000 earned by that salesperson in new sales just to break even, basically, because I have that contribution margin. However, if I want still to keep kind of getting that extra 50% or something, right? And I need like that person to make more than 200. So my projection for the salesperson will not be like, hey, you need to make 200 and that's great. And you say, hey, I need like 400 or 500, right? Because I'm bringing you on board to kind of to speed up the growth, right? And make more money and not like make the same amount of money, right?
Of course, 100%. And if you think about it, what ratio you're looking for, that's another factor you want to put on your planning. So what's your cost to acquire a client? And then what's the ratio? So if your salesperson is $100,000, but you say, okay, I want a 5-to-1 ratio. So I want $500,000 for every 100. Why? Because it takes 200 just to break even. So now you have 300,000 more of profit, so to speak, but only 50% of that is profit.
Right.
So that's 150. And then you're going to have to give some commission to the salesperson probably over their 100,000 for that goal. So you only have 150,000 extra to work with.
And then you have a cost of service, right? And then you have other additional kind of expenses, right? And this is another thing that I wanted to talk with you about. Specifically, from you work with multiple marketing agencies, consulting, like service businesses, right? And you work with you before. How should my, not like P&L look, but how should my cost distribution look when I look at like, okay, I'm making a customer paying me 100%, right? Then let's say 40% should goes to my cost of service, let's say 15% should go to my acquisition, 10% should go to my extra expenses, like, I don't know, like my HR, recruiting, extra costs, support, all of that, and some tools cost. So is there any sort of like way I should be looking at my expense spreadsheet with regards to different categories of my expenses before I do planning, so I can know that, oh my God, my sales costs are too high here, so I need to go down because I'm not making that profit here that I should be making here, right? Or, so let me give you an example what I mean by this. Yep. When I look at my sales team performance, I was like, hey, my sales team is hitting the numbers. This is great. When you have a sales quota and you're hitting the sales quota, you're like a superstar, right? And you will say, hey, I'm hitting the sales quota. However, when I'm looking at the expenses, I'm adding like the sales rep salary plus commission plus market acquisition costs plus cost of service, and I'm comparing that with what my customer is paying me, and I see that I'm not even breaking even. Basically, I'm spending 120% of what my customer is paying for acquiring that customer with all my marketing, sales, and all that. And if I have an LTV, that's okay, right? But I'm kind of playing with the fire here, right? Because I'm spending the 20% of the cash that I don't have, that I have from other clients, and it's not a good job. So for me, it was like logically say, okay, I need to drive my sales costs down or my marketing costs down, right? Or my cost of service down, because all of that should make sense within the client fees the clients are paying me, right? That is the question. So sometimes I have so many categories in that P&L that I cannot make sense on what category is okay and what category is sort of like exceeding its limits. And maybe you have any recommendations, or you've saw some patterns how other people are managing that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, back to my earlier point of being more simple is better. So because you can see trends. So with expenses, we usually like to bucket things. We used to come in and say, take your occupancy, bucket that. Take your sales, or in your case, cost to acquire a client. That would be the sales and marketing function. That's a bucket. Take owner pay. That's a bucket. And look at those levels of where you want to be. Now, as you grow.
Sorry for interrupting you, Jeff, here. What are other buckets? So I have marketing and sales. I have owner's fees. I have occupancy. What else do I have here?
Occupancy. You might have recruiting costs so you might have like training and recruiting costs, which is good. But that's usually most of them. For a service business, there's not too many there. It's usually five buckets, maybe six.
Okay. Different
types of buckets that you look at. And then of course there's the cost of doing the work, which is your cost of goods function. Yeah. But that's separate. That's above the line, as you like to call it, right?
Right.
So, and you have no product, so there's no cost structure there. So does that answer? Those are most of the
So I take these 6 buckets, right? And I compare them, and all of those 6 should fit in what per client. Is it should compare to LTV, or it should be compared to
client? No, you can't compare it to per client. You really need to compare it, because if you compare it to per client, you're going to limit your growth potential. You have to compare it to your LTV. And you got to make sure you have enough funding then. This is why capital allocation and funding is so important. How much am I willing to put into the business, knowing my LTV is $200,000 on a client? How much do I need now, assuming I close 30 clients this year and it costs me this much to close that many? How much money do I need now, knowing year 2 and year 3, we're really going to make the profit?
Right.
So that's how you have to consistently think about it. It's not necessarily looking at current percentages as much as it is looking at current, but also looking at what does year 2 and year 3 look like for our buckets as a healthy organization. That's why multi-year forecasting is important. And pulling it back down to how much capital do I need right now to get to the more profitable period. Mm-hmm. So that's important.
This is really nice. And then based on this, I can do some planning, and then I can define my KPIs, right? Like this is the KPI that I need to hit to be able to, but I cannot define my KPIs before I do the forecasting, right? The forecasting should be like.
You can't because there might be KPIs, Michael, that you would be willing to give in on. Let me give you an example. You might say, right now, owner pay is 5% of our revenue, but we don't have to stay there. We'll go to 2% of revenue and we'll stay at 150 salary each. I'm making something up. And we'll stay there until we really hit the business and we can start taking more money down. Now that's a changing KPI. So we would adjust that in the forecast. And then we would know how much capital you would need with that consideration. We pull it back to a number and say, Michael, you need $400,000. Do you have it? I don't have it. Well, then, Michael, your goals are too aggressive. Pull your numbers down. Okay. Okay. I'll pull my numbers down. That's the way we do it.
Right. And that's why this is sometimes super challenging to do internally because you're so preoccupied with other operations. And that's why having a third-party person or an outsider with experience and with the knowledge and with just by looking at the whole picture and defining those key things is actually, should be super effective in here. Cool.
There's give and take, like I said, you can decide, you can adjust some things and say, I'm willing to wait to pay myself, or I'm willing to, we don't need rent anymore. As an example, that's what happened in COVID with a lot of businesses. They said, oh, wow, we can get out of our leases now. So things like that happen. Change forecasts.
Thanks, Jeff. One of the last things I wanted to touch base with you before we wrap this up, by working with multiple organizations, have you seen any best practices of entrepreneurs by doing something with their either business strategy or operational growth, or anything that you that stand out for you that that they did really good that helped them to grow the business, maybe in Maui niche or in other niches that you can, if you do you have any examples off top of your mind right now with the best practices and the kind of the worst practices, the one that is fail, when you see this, say, okay, this is a fail, this is a no-go, we need to change that. Can you give a few examples of both?
Sure. So what we run into with small businesses is if the owners or the organization itself is extremely good at generating revenue, that's a key component. If they can effectively, consistently generate revenue, then they have something that they can build on. That's an important metric. The reason I bring it up is we'll get into clients and they will say, hey, here's our forecast. And it's very wildly optimistic and so on. And they can't consistently and predictably generate revenue. So that's a major problem with a financial management construct on a business. So when we get in with clients, that's one of the things we say to them very early on. Don't give me made up stuff. Tell me what we can do consistently, and I can map your financial strategy to that. If not, we're going to have problems from day one. So that's what we always say to businesses. Another tool we say is be very careful not to over leverage early on. We find a lot of businesses get into debt to income ratios that are too high early on. They think they can, or maybe they don't have enough personal capital, or they don't have equity investment, and they think they can run the business off of debt, and then they get too high on their debt early on. Those are some other very, very early warning signs. We're careful with businesses. And it can ruin businesses. I mean, we had a company we came into, just to give you a quick example, it was a coffee shop business and a wholesale business. We came in and we looked at their financials and we said, Michael, they're functionally bankrupt. And all we could do was help them not go into bankruptcy and sell off their assets. Those are the things you got to be careful with growth. Wrong, you got to be right about your revenue forecast and conservative, and you need to be careful not to over lever with debt. So
this is great. Quick thing though, how did that coffee shop went to that place? What did they wrong? What they were just overspending? They were just aggressively expanding. What was their main reason for going that bad?
They grew way too fast. As you can imagine, with a coffee shop and a wholesale operation, the margins are real tight.
Yeah.
In your business, you might have 50, 60% margins. Their margins are like 20%.
Oh, I don't have those margins. I'm sorry.
I wish you did.
Okay, so now you're saying that I need to be at 60%. Okay, I need to do something here. Okay. So, okay. Shit. I mean, I'm sorry.
That's great.
I mean, So we should be starting all over again and say, okay, Jeff, how I can get to 60%? That would be the title for this podcast will how to help Michael to get to 60% profit, because that's the way he needs to be, not at some, lower than that, basically.
I love it. I want you to organically grow without investment, Michael. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. I think that one of another advice that I can give for myself is be more flexible with regards to your, like when you grow, you always want to increase your headcount, right? Because you say, hey, I need another marketing person. I need another designer. I need another like CPA or something. But I really recommend people to outsource some of that, right? Because then you are flexible, right? Because I have a problem. My 30% of my clients churned. My metrics doesn't make sense. I know about this. Then I cut some of those expenses off, right? I don't necessarily need to have because you cannot let your employees go right there, right? Because that's not the way it works. But with the vendor, you just terminate the contract, right? So that's why I very often happen to take vendors, outsource partners to help me to solve certain problem and learning how to work with them. Because if you never worked with a vendor before that is solving a crucial part of your business, or like doing, for example, like development work or design work, right, or your financial planning, it is very difficult from the very start to see not the value but to understand how to work effectively, because you always think like, hey, if I have that person with me on board, then I'll be more effective, right? But in some time, when you work with multiple vendors, you learn how to do that. So that's, you start being more flexible with that, right?
It's a great idea. Yeah. It's a great idea until you get to a certain point where you're just so large that you need sort of that consistent presence of someone, then you hire them. But along the road, having vendors to plug things is what the world has become. I mean, that's where, especially in the US, I mean, I think the world itself is also, but I mean, the technology has allowed us to specialize a lot more and be able to bring in vendors to support our growth.
And that could relax you on some of that cash flow problem, right? Because you wouldn't need to spend that much every month, right? It's more like, so this is great. Cool. So Jeff, if anyone who's listening to this wanted to get in touch with you, should they go to your website? Should they go and reach out to you on LinkedIn? And then the second thing is that when do these people, or what signals do they need to have in their business to know that, hey, that's a good time for me to talk to Jeff?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, you can definitely go to my LinkedIn, Jeff Bruno. You can go to our website, yocfo.com. That's your outsourcedcfo.com. Happy to call us, 215-470-8778. That's our office phone. But really what it is, it's pain points. Like you said, it's cash flow. It's, I don't have financial clarity. I don't know how I'm going to grow my business. I need that clarity. And with that clarity comes comfort. But there's an important thing here also that I want people to hear. What we bring to the table for companies is communication. That's a big thing. We are embedded and we are communicating the strategy with you all the time.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Belkin's Growth Podcast and found it useful. Be sure to subscribe and catch upcoming episodes on iTunes and Stitcher.